think we're now live. Good evening, my name is John from Broadsheet and you're very welcome to Tomorrow Tonight. We are very honoured to be joined by Bernard Purcell, a London-based editor of the Irish World, which is on shelves today and tomorrow. Thursday in Ireland.
Wednesday in Britain.
Wednesday in Britain, yeah. And Bernard, you've written a very powerful editorial about the bad faith of Boris Johnson, and hopefully we'll speak about that later. Yeah.
Yeah.
1 second, we'll just go straight to the papers, if you don't mind. How are things there, Brexit-wise, just briefly while I get this?
Well, there's a poll that suggests that I think only 37% of people are concerned about rejoining the European Union, and various Brexiteers have seized on that. Brexit isn't really an issue, it's more the kind of bread and butter consequences of delays, which you can't just blame on seasonal glitches as they did in January. So there are difficulties, and they're even beginning to admit them at government now as well. But there are, one of the things that the government likes to do here is, even though they have what they want, it's the deal they wanted. It has always played well with their core support to have the EU to blame for difficulties, and often it has to be said that the EU plays right into that and manages to allow itself to become that pantomime villain, so to speak.
Yeah, is that a name of Remainers to get back into the EU? I mean, do they conceive that?
I think people aren't thinking about it at the moment.
No.
They're thinking about the pandemic, they're thinking about the economic consequences. They're hoping that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and they want the grand reopening. And they also, there has been a very, very high death toll here. You have a very vocal group amongst Tory backbenchers calling themselves, I think, the COVID research group or something like that. It's never very obvious that they do much research, but they're pressing for reopening, a much swifter reopening than the current timetable allows for. And there have been warnings today in the comments from Chris Whitty that even at the modest pace that we have now, something like 30,000 deaths might still be expected between now and the summer. And there will be a surge, especially as yesterday, schools started to reopen. And then over the next few weeks, we will see a gradual reopening of various businesses. But as things stand, there's something like a 5-week gap between all the key dates, so that the infection rates can be monitored.
Right, and have the pubs open but without alcohol?
Not yet.
Yeah, okay.
No, not yet.
Right, but that's going to happen, isn't it? They're going to open but not sell booze.
I don't know about the not selling booze.
Okay.
It's something that has been put. There have been in the last period, there were takeaway pints, and people were going along with their plastic cups and things like that.
Maybe it was some fake news I read. Maybe I picked it up.
No, it was a proposal. We joked about it because we said that at the same time they're also going to open swimming pools without any water.
Yeah. I should have remembered that, Bernard. The Irish Examiner, scandal of 20,000 illegal adoptions. Were you looking at this, Bernard?
I was, because Mrs. Tingle, who is the campaigner over here, who found out, I think, about 14 years ago that she'd been illegally adopted, and she's down in Bournemouth now, and she's been part of the campaign group. We featured her quite a bit from 2012 and on. She has started to get active again. She wants, following last week's RTE documentary, any inquiry to be much more inclusive than is currently being suggested, and also the government to do rather more than just let people know or have access to their birth records and to their files. Although we know from today that the advice to the minister responsible appears to be that no good would come from any kind of investigation or any kind of action. So it's a familiar refrain. It's something that the people who are affected, they've had a long uphill struggle. We find ourselves Groundhog Day repeating it time and time again. But there's a kind of Catherine Zapponi, her successors, or people. There just seems to be a rather perverse resistance to trying to make some broad brand gesture that can just give people some more information about their lives. There's a worry about data, there's a worry about liability, there's a worry, but the human issue tends to be overlooked all too often, and that's where you can see that the Examiner there has come into some of the human stories.
Yeah. And a lot of them went to England.
Yes, a great many of our readers of I took over at the World in 2012, and certainly over the next couple of years, and some of them are no longer with us, but I met and spoke to several people, older people who had made their lives in Britain because they had left institutions like that, either as a child or as a parent, or had contact with their original parents. It's far more common than you would think, and a lot of people just got on with their lives, and they've shown quite a bit of forbearance. Excuse me, I beg your pardon. I think I've managed your cough.
Yeah, sorry.
Very good broadband there.
Terrible. So yeah, again, this sort of continues. The commission has, as you say, recommended against a full government inquiry, but I think after the brilliant RT Investigate show documentary, that I think there will be.
Well, there seems to be consensus there between. I do apologise for the coughing. Mary Lou MacDonald was quite robust on it. Micheál Martin was conciliatory and gave some fairly, I think, concrete promises, at least on access to documents and prioritising the legislation when we spoke in the Dawn last week. So we'll see. I mean, the promise is to get it done by this year, but we've seen in the past that civil servants whose names are never really known are pretty good at finding reasons for not proceeding.
Yeah, they do. Would you like to get a glass of water, Bernard?
If you wouldn't bear.
Yeah, no problem at all.
Could I get a glass of water? I'm still here. Actually,
good.
Someone has very kindly.
Oh, splendid. Minister, Davy breaches not criminal offences. Have you been following the Davy story?
I have, yes, and I have to be careful about what I say.
Yeah.
But it's there. We were saying about how some things never change in Ireland. One of the big hold-ups to Allied Irish Bank, which is entirely taxpayer-owned, or virtually entirely taxpayer-owned in Ireland, was the payment of bonuses to staff, I believe, and that was holding it up. And then we found that there was an entirely improper conflict of interest in the management of again, all roads lead to Anglo-Irish Bank in many respects, and the Tiger. So the selling of debt and I'll refrain from the specifics, but the people who have watched Irish banks over the years would probably say that's an all too familiar refrain.
Yeah, well, again, another familiar refrain, but Davies, they were the kind of, they were the big boys, weren't they?
Yes.
Anyway.
And didn't, I mean, one of the leading lights of Irish finance. I think he went out then and started his own after there as well.
Yeah. Oh, Dermot.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
He outgrew.
Yeah, the Kaiser.
A formidable individual.
Well, I mean, when I was working on the Sunday Times, there was an internal email system. And when you put his name in, when you were writing, if you were writing a story, you just put his name in, like it was like Claxon, please contact the legal department. I mean, I won't say he's litigious, but he sent a lot of solicitors' letters.
He guards his privacy. I mean, many years ago, the paper I worked for forgot that it had sponsored a particular yacht in a round the world race. I think it was Whitbread. And it was coming into Southampton. And so I was dispatched at very short notice. I think it must have been about 1990 or something like that. And you can't hear me?
No, it's just your thing is a little bit getting Yeah.
I was the paper I worked for had sponsored a particular yacht in around the world, whether it was a strategic partnership or what. But I got down there to Southampton, scrambled at short notice, and it had suddenly changed its name to that of the particular stockbrokers firm that the gentleman we mentioned had set up and owned. And I must say, I found him, it was probably a bit stilted, the conversation, because it was one of these, well, what do you say, you're up in the sea, but, and I knew feck all about why I was supposed to be there in the first place, and the fact that the name changed, and so clearly it was like, don't mention the war, or don't mention it. I was, but he was a very engaging, very charming individual, and handled it all with good grace. But that is over 30 years ago. I think he has become a lot more serious about his reputation, although he has.
Well, I think he just had a strategy. I think whenever he's mentioned, just I mean, even a sort of photo caption, but it was a strategy adopted then by Dennis O'Brien, which I think he kind of, it didn't work as well for Dennis as it did for Dermot. I mean, Dermot managed to, well,
I don't think Dermot had anything to hide.
I'm not. Bernard.
I didn't say anybody did.
Nobody. No, the everyone's fine. So daily breach is not criminal offences, but I wonder about that. Minister backs Donnelly despite vaccine target failure. Are you following Donnelly's, Stephen Donnelly's?
Yes, but he certainly seems very, very certain of himself, despite results that fall short of what was promised.
You mean he comes across very confident, and
yes.
Yeah, I guess that's the. I mean, he's sort of that management. We were talking McKinsey, isn't it? McKinsey. Mm-hmm. I guess that's what they come out like.
Well, judge him by his results.
Yeah, no. I mean, but they're kind of autumn, slightly robotic, I imagine, just around personal criticism and whatnot. I imagine,
or being held to account.
Yeah. It's they really landed a minute, didn't they? Fianna Fáil, they gave them the Irish Sun. 750,000 people, 725,000 people watched the Meghan and Harry interview on RT2. Mm-hmm. So we're obliged, I guess, to cover it. I mean,
so it's there. People watched it. People want to talk about it. There's not a great.
Bernard has no opinion on it.
I don't need to have. I spent more than 20 years. I covered all of the breakup of Diana and Charles and that sideshow, and the leak, the bugging of his telephone conversations with Camilla, and for Windsor fires. All of that. That's what I was. And because I worked for a particular newspaper group, I don't need to do that now. I don't need to watch it, so I'm not going
to. Yeah, but I mean, I guess, it was her Annus Horribilis 20 years ago.
Oh, 30 years ago.
30 years ago. God, yeah, 30. Somebody wrote her Annus Horribilis.
There's more sympathy for, I think, the further you go. There's a great deal of sympathy for Harry. He's a popular figure here. We've seen that the Society of Editors over here is in trouble for trying to defend the indefensible by saying that British popular press is not racist or bigoted in its coverage when confronted with headlines that suggest the opposite. We've seen the editor of the Financial Times and the editor of The Guardian, both editors are women, have dissociated themselves and said from that, and that there does need to be a kind of long, hard look at such attitudes in popular media here, and they would support such a look. We've also seen the Palace today acknowledging that the racism issue raised by Meghan Markle, although it took something like nearly 2 days to respond to that, when last week it was much, much faster out of the gate, saying that they would launch an inquiry into alleged bullying by Meghan Markle from 2 years prior.
I suppose the racism, they'd have to wait till Philip's operation was finished to ask him.
I don't know, but no, I think there's sometimes it's reading the room and judging the room. It can be slow to respond because it's essentially, I think it's been described as a medieval breeding system, the royalty, a hereditary monarchy. And I think Stephen Colbert in the States last night said, when you know things are bad, when the royal couple are fleeing the UK to escape racism and to go to the US to escape racism in the UK. So, if that's one that they would find difficult coming to. Meanwhile, of course, there's somebody who's resident in Buckingham Palace, whom the authorities in America have said repeatedly that they would like to talk to him, and there's no sight of Andrew anywhere. People are speculating about the more serious.
Well, this is it. You didn't expect the royal family to be woke on any level, in terms of their attitudes towards, other races, foreigners, whatever. They're you just wouldn't expect that. In fact, that's on the low end of the scale that I would have expected out of Philip's mouth, or in terms of what he's actually what he's personally said about Chinese or whatever. But
that has been on the record, yes.
Yeah. So, is that it then? It doesn't seem to be the seismic, or perhaps I'm misreading it. Is it seismic in Britain?
It's popular. It's attention grabbing, but you're not going to necessarily see much of a change in the royal family as a result. You might see some high-profile initiatives taken. It's an institution and an organisation that gets something like £100 million a year from the taxpayer. It is worth noting, though, that the former Australian Prime Minister expressed a sentiment that has often been repeated, that countries like it should rethink becoming a republic once the current monarch, the Queen, has passed. That would be a bit unfair. Everything about it is unfair by definition because it's an hereditary monarchy. It's not based on principle. But Charles has served, well, probably, I think, an even longer apprenticeship than Edward did under Victoria. So, and I think the man has earned his shot on the rules as they stand.
Yes.
But
I thought after Diana and all that, the early Anna Cerebralist, that they would become more like the Danish royal families, so bicycling royals and stuff like that. But it didn't.
Oh, they've consciously fought against that since the branded themselves and created this kind of mythos, and unusually there's an awful lot. They have attempted to trim it in recent years, but there's a lot of them on the public payroll, or at least the royal family is quite large in terms of those deriving benefit from it. I think Charles and William, and indeed even Harry, are supposed to favour paring it down, modernizing it, and taking quite a few family members off the payroll, so to speak, including, I believe, the gentleman that we mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and not giving Archie the royal title. Was that a snub, or that? I suppose Beatrice and.
It becomes a bit invidious for us to say that, well, these things don't really matter, but then why did you leave someone out? Of course, it's inconsistent, but it's a lot of it's quite ephemeral. It was a bit odd, though, seeing or reading that Harry had said that he'd been cut off. He's without cut off from any funds or financial support. He's 35 and he inherited several million from his mother.
Right. And also, they signed a big deal with Netflix in there, so they're involved.
Essentially, they've been very canny. It will be hard for the royal mystique and the royal family, as it is known here, to continue the way it has for so many years, and because it's that kind of.
But you were probably saying that 30 years ago, Bernard. You know, it's funny. They're very kind of at the end. They endure. You know, they kind of reshape, shapeshift.
Yes, but you're talking about an age of deference that has gradually been displaced by a culture of celebrity, and they tried to harness celebrity, but do it on their terms, whereas celebrity can be quite all-consuming and quite promiscuous.
Yeah.
Walter Bagehot, famously, as you're well aware, said in the 19th century that one should never let daylight into majesty, because it takes away the mystique, the mystery, and then people see them as just ordinary, in some cases quite limited people.
That's right. Isn't that why the Queen, she cancelled that? They made a documentary in the 60s, and then it was only shown recently. They didn't show it at the time.
Well, they always retain the rights, because one of the things that I used to have to do was I'd sit on the Society of I can't remember what the organisation was called. It was the Newspaper Society, and it was you had one of the responsibilities was royal rota, just on photographs and things like that, and they always retain the copyright. But they've been quite canny about.
Right.
Because the papers themselves note, for instance, that a photo of Diana, even would triple sales, whether you were a magazine or newsprint, and they knew that was their currency. And but that particular 1969 BBC film was about the investiture, I think, of Charles, because they created a whole mystique around the Prince of Wales, and but the same was done, I think, for the Queen's coronation as well. A whole Zadok, a whole kind of myth was peddled and created.
It was in Carnarvon Castle, wasn't it? The investiture,
yes.
And it looked absolutely ridiculous. He looked like a comic character from the Beano or something, you know. So Ermine, but
I think he had very little say in any of that.
I'm sure.
As an individual, he has tried to support some very progressive causes in his own way, and has had some impressive results. There are much you can criticize, but he has attempted to put his money where his mouth is.
Well, they've kind of reinvented themselves, himself and Camilla. The Echo, 1.8 million Cork drugs haul. Not
best thing about that is that the dog is called Marley.
Yeah, that's it. Well spotted. And he looks very happy.
He does indeed, doesn't he?
He does.
Very chilly.
Don't get high on your own supply, Marley. There are a lot of, judging by Rolling News, there's a lot of cannabis busts at the moment. I mean, a lot of grow houses and stuff like that, I suppose, because of the lockdown.
And is cannabis the real problem or the real issue? I would have thought that some of the harder drugs posed.
Yeah, no, it's not the issue at all. I wouldn't say, but the guards, it's an easy one to kind of bust, because it's like you've got Marley will sniff you out, will sniff it out. You know? We had another dog called James who looked very, very content with his stash. The Queen says racism claim will be handled in private. Presumably that's a dig at the public nature of how the revelation came out.
The top of the Guardian there is something that has been, it's been with us now for something like 10 years, because under Osborne and Cameron, funding for local authorities was slashed on the altar of what they called austerity, which we now know from Rishi Sunak's budget in the House of Commons. It was it's now utterly discredited, just as trickle-down economics was discredited under Reagan and Thatcher. But the local authorities, as I said, had their funds slashed. They were told to use their reserves. The reserves were, which they did, but the reserves were intended for things like pandemics and public health emergencies. So we now have a pandemic, and they do not have resources. The other live public spending issue here is the fact that the government has decided that nurses are, NHS nurses, having pulled out the stops for the past year, are worth only 1%. Now, Simon Stevens, the head of the NHS, who has been described as stiletto-like in how he deals with governments and fights his corner for the NHS, said that he put it pretty much threw the gauntlet down at Sunak, but in a very, very subtle way is the best way of putting it. They're saying that they had been prepared for a payment of above 2%, but making quite clear that this is some decision, it's by choice that they've decided to actually take on the nurses now that they feel that the emergency has passed. And Stevens made the point that they were able to find money for test and trace. Now, he always calls it test and trace. He doesn't call it NHS test and trace because it's not NHS test and trace. Meanwhile, the vaccination program, which is implemented by the NHS, is called the government vaccination program. Now, this is quite deliberate marketing.
I see what you mean.
Yes. So, but anyway, Stevens made the point that he was able to find funding to go into next year's budget, so to speak, to give them the additional resources that they need. And he's putting it up to them to do so now, because the NHS will also require significant resources when normal business resumes. Yeah, just on the nurses' pay, the resistance to it is presumably because the police will come in and the army and everybody will want whatever the 3%. Is that the worry? I'm not sure that it's necessarily even that. I think there's, in principle, that there's a kind of antipathy to public sector pay. And Lord, as you say, right now it's a very bad PR, isn't it? Yes, it is, and but we've seen that with resistance on school meals as well. But I mean, I think the minister in the House of Lords, Lord Bethell, was very 19th century when he said there are plenty of people waiting to take those jobs if nurses leave. But one of the points that has been made about the government's promise to bring in extra nurses, when they've massaged the statistics, they've actually relied on nurses who are in the service not leaving early and staying within the service, or staying longer than they originally intended. Now, if they continue to mishandle this, which would be very, very tone-deaf politics, and they've got some good advisors in that, which they did not have in the past, they will be walking into yet another self-inflicted PR catastrophe. But as we've seen in the past, they probably will, they're probably positioning themselves to make some kind of concession to get it above the 1%. Okay. Piers Morgan storming off Good Morning Britain. Well, you have to hand it to him. His unique selling proposition is that he manages to insert himself into somebody else's story or something, and make it all about him. Yeah, does seem planned, and the whole escapade. Well, by 2 p.m. this afternoon, Ofcom, which is probably not the most proactive of organizations, said that it was going to investigate his comments and his remarks yesterday, because I think by 2 p.m. they'd had 41,000 complaints. About him, about what he was saying, right? Because he's anti-Meghan. He was in Meghan's circle, and now he's not. And yeah, he was dropped. People have said that those who really want to express their or wish to commiserate with him could probably do so by leaving a message on their own answer phones, and he'll get it. Oh, yeah, okay. Allegedly. Well, the Daily Mirror is still paying out, if you look at its most recent accounts, it's still paying out, running into stratospheric sums for... Was it Piers who showed Hugh Grant how to hack? He says well, it was 8705 was the BT cell that it was, nobody changed it, and
Oh, right.
it was star 8705, and then I think there was a different one for but it was Mercury, but they were default factory
Yeah.
set.
Yeah.
And it took people a long time to realize that you change it. So
Yeah. No, I think Piers Morgan during the Levinson, he said that he had shown Hugh Grant.
yes.
Hugh Grant.
And he had also taunted Sven-Göran Eriksson, the England manager, I think, about messages, and I think Ulrika Johnson, who said that. So he'd been quite brazen, they said, about it, but clearly, while Murdoch's papers and the News of the World were obvious.
Yeah, the Mirror got off a bit lightly.
It was done at an absolutely industrial scale in the Mirror.
Yeah, and then they got off kind of lightly as compared really to them, Murdoch. But I suppose the News of the World were fairly. I noticed the Queen. I don't think she looks quite more stooped in the last couple of weeks, or is that just my imagination? She looked very.
I don't know where that picture was taken, but her husband is in hospital, and she is a nonagenarian, although they are a long-lived family. But there's been quite a bit going on, so I think anybody in her position would probably look a bit stooped.
Yeah. Oh no. Yeah. Nonagenarian. It's a great word, isn't it? Nonagenarian. Comparing it with the Diana one, which I thought was much more like end of monarchy kind of interview with the Diana one, rather than sorry.
Oh no, there's no doubt about that. In fact, somebody who probably hasn't spoken to me since, who was working for Prince Charles at the time. I was due to meet him for a cup of tea, and he was expressing concern about that forthcoming interview. And I had said to him, "Oh, don't worry about it. These things have a life. There's a life cycle on these 24 to 74 hours on the year." And how spectacularly wrong could I be? Although it looks like Martin Bashir is off the hook as well for having
really
false pretenses to get the
they've cleared him, have they?
They haven't. They've said that they will not be taken further. It's
okay. Well, he's quite ill as well, isn't he? Sorry.
Yes. And it's a long time ago. If it was, if you were up at the Scottish Sheriff's Court, it would probably be recorded as not proven.
Not proven, yeah. Speaking of not proven, Biden's stimulus will boost global recovery from COVID, says OECD. UK hit back at EU's outright lie over claims it imposed a vaccine export ban.
That's Michel, isn't it? The president of the Council of Ministers, who, so I think his own fellow ministers and even.
Weren't they trying to block? They were going to block those Italian stuff going out of Europe.
I think it was Italy didn't want it to go to Australia.
Yeah,
it was last week. But remember, we said that people like Michel sometimes give Boris Johnson, Michael Gove, and others the cover they want from by acting like they did a couple of weeks ago, even though it was all dealt with in a couple of hours. It was just such a ridiculously crass move that it gives, as I said, the political cover that Johnson and others want. Johnson yesterday in his press conference told 3 easily provable falsehoods, lies, that when he said that because they'd left, they were able to start free ports, which they were always able to do, that they were able to roll out their vaccination program, which actually started while they were still in there, and they had special permission anyway. And that they got several new international trade deals, which are actually just rolling over the existing deals that they had, and nothing new to them, and they're of relatively small value. So falsehoods are something that becomes increasingly difficult to challenge. When you're covering people say it confidently enough. George Eustace, the Environment Secretary, did it repeatedly over the fish exports and shellfish.
Yeah.
Say it confidently enough, have a villain in the piece, and you can.
Well, yeah. I read your editorial, and I've just finished Tom Barr's book on Johnson, and you really, some boy, good Lord, that guy. I mean, it's kind of amazing that he is Prime Minister, isn't it? I mean,
well, the main point I think in that editorial was that people knew his character. They knew this about him when they elected him. His party knew this about him when he was made Prime Minister in lead of the Tory party. And he went to a general election, and there is nothing, he has shown no particular characteristic as Prime Minister that we did not know about in all his other posts and everything, whether as a journalist or whether as Mayor of London.
have you heard that tape of him with Darius Guppy?
Yes.
Yeah.
But,
it's incredible that he would have become mayor after that. Even like he's got away with a lot, doesn't he? I mean, his personality is so ebullient, and kind of attractive qualities he has that sort of mitigate a lot of the.
Well, it's a combination of Dr. Pangloss and McGorder on steroids. And people can be worn down by, say, outrage and indignation. And when somebody is there offering something positive and upbeat, and as he claimed yesterday, well, look, with goodwill and common sense, we'll find a way through. That's very, very tempting. And
it is.
But the reality
after Theresa May, you'll go for that kind of.
Absolutely, and it's others who will then generally have to find that solution or find it, because he's always looking to get through the short term. His whole kind of, even as Prime Minister, it's find short-term ways out of this, largely to protect his own personal political capital rather than any greater concern. But my point was that we have to live with this. Ireland has to live with it. The EU has to live with it. We can be outraged and say, "Oh, liar, liar, pants on fire," or we try and nudge him towards the enlightened self-interest. The other points that I made as well, though, is that, or that they've made, is that Joe Biden doesn't have to do any of that. We do, but Joe Biden has stated that he will support the Good Friday Agreement, that he believes in it. Anytime he has said that, it's pretty much brought similar lip service from not just Boris Johnson and others. And the task for everyone now is to actually make that lip service, make deeds match that lip service.
Yeah, but I guess he's got a war on two fronts now in Scotland and Northern Ireland. In a sense, he's got two competing pro-EU, mostly, forces within his own, kingdom.
Well, it's a much narrower issue that we're looking at in Ireland. You do not want the law of unintended consequences to follow bad governance and careless choices. Because I think the point that anyone would acknowledge as well is that no voters in England in particular don't really care about Ireland or Northern Ireland. They can't see it beyond the prism of, say, terrorist outrages have stopped. Oh, that's great, let's move on.
Yeah.
And one of the arch Brexiteers over here in I think they rather oxymoronically called themselves the European Research Group, Andrew Bridgen, was under the impression that because of that, British people here were entitled to Irish passports. So everything would be fine. They'd be able to rely on that for their EU privileges.
Well, this is the editorial. You You didn't mention Ursula triggering Article 16 now. You left that out, I noticed.
Well, it wasn't about that, and it wasn't about Brexit.
It was about trust and acting in good faith.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, okay. Similar, Ursula, she could be told
complete horlicks of it, and she tried to blame people who knew better.
Yeah.
Because she does have just as we were saying that, say people, there are people in politics over here who could not care less about Ireland or Northern Ireland. I'm sure there are people in German politics who similarly feel the same way, and I'm sure that she has an eye on returning to German politics in 4 years' time. And so I see that she similarly is lashed out at, I think, the drugs manufacturers. Was it AstraZeneca yesterday? And blaming them because their own political reputations are taking the flak for the management of the vaccination program and for insufficient production of the vaccines. So,
well, yeah, there's a pair of them. I mean, Ursula has a sketchy background as well,
well, she was some probably unsuccessful defense minister, wasn't she? Who made a number of bad calls.
Yeah. Well, and kind of a little bit worse, but yeah. They deserve each other, the pair of them, Boris and Ursula. Bernard, thanks a lot for having a look at the papers tonight. The Irish World is on sale in Ireland on Thursday, and it's in London tomorrow, on sale in Britain tomorrow. Am I right?
It is indeed.
Okay.
All good and not so good news agents.
Yes, Thank you very much, Bernard.